I'll give $100 million to whoever fixes this." The CEO was laughing, mocking his own engineers. Then the cleaning lady's 12-year-old son said, "I know how." The CEO mocked him too. 30 seconds later, the problem was solved. This is the story of how a child made $100 million by doing what 200 experts couldn't, and why the CEO's laughter turned into the most expensive silence of his life. Before we dive in, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And if you love stories where the underdog wins, hit that subscribe button. You won't regret it. Now, let me take you back to where it all began.
The conference room on the 47th floor of Titan Tech Tower had never felt this small. Marcus Bentley, CEO and founder, stood at the head of the glass table, his jaw clenched so tight it could crack diamonds. Behind him, floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Seattle skyline, a view that usually reminded him of everything he'd built. Today, it felt like watching his empire crumble in real time. "Show me again," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. The lead engineer, Dr. Sarah Chen, fumbled with the remote. The massive screen flickered to life, displaying footage that had already gone viral across every news platform. 47 delivery drones, Titan Tech's revolutionary Skyfleet system, falling from the sky simultaneously. 12 cities, same exact moment, 2:47 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Providence, Rhode Island. A drone crashed through a coffee shop's glass roof. Austin, Texas. Another plummeted into a residential pool. Denver, Colorado. One narrowly missed a school playground. The synchronized catastrophe played out like a horrific choreographed dance. Each titanium and carbon fiber machine, worth $85,000 apiece, becoming $4 million of falling scrap metal multiplied by 47. But the hardware? That was the least of Marcus's problems. "Stock price?" he asked, though he already knew. "Down 67% in 4 hours, the CFO replied, not meeting his eyes. "We've lost $2 billion in market cap. Trading was halted twice." Marcus's phone buzzed relentlessly on the table. The FAA, the Department of Transportation, a senator from the Commerce Committee, 3 separate law firms preparing class action lawsuits. He ignored them all. Casualties? The word tasted like ash in his mouth. "Miraculous," Sarah said quickly. "Minor injuries only. A broken arm in Providence, some cuts from glass. If that drone in Denver had been 15 seconds earlier—" "Don't," Marcus cut her off. He already imagined it 1,000 times in the past 6 hours. Children, a playground, his company's logo on twisted metal. That was the nightmare that would have ended everything, not just Titan Tech, but his freedom.
The board meeting that followed was a masterclass in corporate panic. "We need answers, Marcus. The entire automated delivery sector is watching. Amazon is already drafting statements distancing themselves from our technology. Our investors want blood." Marcus listened to them dissect his life's work like vultures picking at a carcass. Titan Tech had been his vision, autonomous delivery drones that could revolutionize logistics, reduce carbon emissions, and make same-hour delivery available to everyone, not just urban elites. 5 years of development, $400 million in funding, partnerships with every major retailer. Gone in 147 seconds of synchronized failure. "What caused it?" the board chair demanded. Sarah stepped forward, her tablet trembling slightly in her hands. "We're calling it a synchronization cascade failure. All 47 drones were connected to our central AI navigation system. At 2:47 p.m., something triggered a feedback loop. Each drone tried to correct its position based on the other's data, but the corrections created more errors, which created more corrections, which—" "I don't need the technical poetry," Marcus interrupted. "Can you fix it?" The silence that followed was louder than any alarm. "We're working on it," Sarah finally said. "We've assembled a task force, 200 of our best engineers. We're running simulations around the clock. We've brought in consultants from MIT, former NASA engineers, specialists in how long?" Another pause. 6 months. Maybe more. "We don't have 6 months," the CFO interjected. "We have 30 days before the FAA revokes our operating license. If we can't demonstrate we've solved this, we're done, not just grounded, finished, bankrupt." Marcus felt the walls closing in. 30 days, 200 brilliant minds, a problem so complex that even his top experts couldn't explain it without drowning in jargon. That night, after everyone had left, after the lawyers had finished their dire predictions, after the board had given him their ultimatum, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He would do something desperate, something public, something that would either save his company or destroy what little credibility he had left. He would offer a bounty, $100 million to anyone who could solve the unsolvable problem. And he would announce it with all the arrogance of a man who had nothing left to lose. What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that the solution to his $100 million crisis was already in his building. She arrived every night at 9, pushing a cleaning cart. Her name was Maria Flores, and she was about to change everything.
The war room, that's what everyone called Conference Room B now, looked like a hurricane had torn through a library and a computer lab simultaneously. Whiteboards covered every wall, dense with equations that would make a quantum physicist's head spin. Empty energy drink cans formed small pyramids on every surface. The smell of cold coffee and desperation hung thick in the air. Dr. Sarah Chen hadn't slept in her own bed for 11 days. Neither had the 199 other engineers crammed into Titan Tech's headquarters, working in rotating shifts that blurred the line between day and night. These weren't ordinary programmers. Marcus had assembled a dream team that read like a greatest hits album of technical genius. There was Dr. James Park, who designed navigation systems for Mars rovers. Dr. Aisha Okonkwo, whose algorithms powered half the world's air traffic control systems. Robert Zhang, a 24-year-old prodigy who'd solved a Millennium Prize problem in mathematics before he could legally rent a car. 200 brilliant minds, combined IQ that could probably split atoms with pure thought. And they were failing. "Run simulation 847, Sarah called out, her voice hoarse. The team watched their screens as virtual drones flew through digital skies. For 37 seconds, everything looked perfect. Then, like watching a flock of birds suddenly forget how to fly, the synchronized collapse began. Every single time. "Damn it!" Robert slammed his fist on the desk. "We've tried frequency modulation. We've tried staggered launch sequences. We've tried isolating each drone's decision-making process. Nothing works."
"The problem is the synchronization protocol itself," Dr. Okonkwo argued, pulling up another screen of cascading data. "The drones share positioning data every 0.3 seconds. When one drone detects an anomaly, it signals the others. But if multiple drones signal simultaneously—" "We know what happens," James interrupted, gesturing at the whiteboard covered in probability trees that looked like abstract art. "We've modeled it 10,000 different ways. The question is, why does the cascade trigger at that exact moment? And how do we prevent it?" 15 days into the crisis, Marcus called an emergency meeting. All 200 engineers assembled in the auditorium. He stood on stage, looking like he'd aged 5 years in 2 weeks. His tie was loosened, his usually perfect hair disheveled. The confidence that had built an empire was cracking. "I'm paying you geniuses a fortune.
MIT graduates, Stanford PhDs, people who've sent robots to other planets. And we can't figure out why our drones can't stay in the sky? The room was silent. Maybe, Marcus continued, his tone dripping with bitter sarcasm, maybe I should just grab a random kid off the street. Hell, a child could probably solve this faster than... He stopped himself, but the damage was done. The insult hung in the air like poison gas. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. Around her, brilliant minds, people who dedicated their lives to solving impossible problems, stared at their shoes. That night, the war room felt even more suffocating. Maria Flores arrived at 9 p.m. sharp, as she did every night, pushing her cleaning cart down the hallway. She wore the same navy blue uniform she'd worn for 3 years, her name embroidered in white thread over her heart. Most people didn't notice her. To them, she was invisible, just part of the building's machinery, like the elevators or the air conditioning. But Maria noticed everything. She noticed the exhaustion etched into these engineers' faces, the desperation in their voices when they argued about feedback loops and cascade triggers. She didn't understand the technical words, but she understood struggle. She understood what it looked like when people were drowning. Behind her, sitting cross-legged in the corner with a worn backpack and a notebook covered in doodles, was her 12-year-old son, Diego. "Mijo, don't touch anything," she reminded him in Spanish, though he never did. Diego knew the rules. Stay quiet, stay out of the way, do your homework while Mama works. They couldn't afford after-school care. On nights when Maria's sister couldn't watch him, Diego came to the office. He would sit in whatever room his mother was cleaning, invisible like her, doing math problems under fluorescent lights while executives walked past without a glance. Tonight, Diego wasn't doing homework. He was staring at the whiteboards, his young mind trying to make sense of the chaos of equations and diagrams. He saw drawings of drones, lines showing their flight paths crossing and recrossing like a plate of spaghetti, numbers and symbols that looked like a secret language. But he also saw something else, something so simple, so obvious, that he assumed these brilliant adults must have already considered it and dismissed it for reasons he didn't understand. Diego looked at his mother, scrubbing coffee stains from the conference table, her hands red and raw from industrial cleaner. He looked back at the whiteboard. No, he thought. They would have seen it. They're geniuses. So he said nothing. He just kept watching, his 12-year-old brain turning over a question that seemed too elementary to even ask. A question that would soon be worth $100 million.
27 days had passed since the crash. 3 days remained before the FAA pulled Titan Tech's license permanently. The media had turned Marcus Bentley into a punchline. Late-night hosts joked about his $100 million participation trophy. Tech blogs ran headlines like, "Billionaire admits defeat," and "When genius money can't buy solutions." But inside Titan Tech, nobody was laughing. Marcus stood alone in his corner office, the Seattle skyline now looking like a jury waiting to deliver a guilty verdict. His phone sat face up on the desk, displaying a message from his lawyer. Bankruptcy papers ready to file. Just say when. His personal assistant knocked softly. "Mr. Bentley, your 8 p.m. call." Marcus nodded, unmuting the video conference. His daughter Emma's face appeared on screen. 13 years old, worried eyes that looked too much like his own. "Dad, are you okay?" He tried to smile. Failed. "Just some grown-up stuff, sweetheart." "Is the company really going to close?" Her voice cracked. "Jaden at school said his dad said you're going bankrupt. He said we're going to lose our house." Marcus felt something break inside his chest. All the bravado, all the tech CEO armor, gone. "I don't know, Em. I'm trying. I'm trying so hard to fix this." "What if you can't?" The question hung in the air. What if brilliance wasn't enough? What if money couldn't solve everything? What if he'd built his entire empire on a foundation with a crack he never saw coming? "Then we figure it out. Together, I promise." After the call ended, Marcus sat in the darkness of his office, feeling more alone than he'd ever felt in his life. 3 floors below, Maria Flores was cleaning that very office, emptying trash cans and wiping down surfaces. Diego sat in his usual corner, supposedly doing homework, but his eyes kept drifting to the glass wall overlooking the war room. He could see the engineers inside, their movements slow and defeated. They'd stopped arguing. That was the scariest part. They'd simply run out of ideas. Diego had been watching them for 27 nights now. He'd seen their energy fade like a dying battery. And every night, he'd stared at those whiteboards, at the solution that seemed so obvious to him, but that he was too afraid to mention. What if he was wrong? What if these geniuses would laugh at him the way kids at school laughed when he wore his cousin's hand-me-down shoes? What if he embarrassed his mother, got her fired? But tonight was different. Tonight he'd heard Marcus's conversation with his daughter through the office door Maria had left open while she cleaned.
The great CEO, the man who seemed larger than life, who'd offered $100 million with casual arrogance, was just a scared dad. Just like Diego's own father had been, before the construction accident took him away 3 years ago. Diego thought about his mom, about how her hands bled sometimes from the harsh chemicals, about how she worked 2 jobs so he could stay in school, about how she never complained, never quit, even when the world made her invisible. Maybe speaking up wouldn't change anything, but maybe, just maybe, staying silent was worse. At 11:47 p.m., after Maria finished cleaning and went to restock her cart, Diego made a decision. He walked into the empty war room, his heart hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. The whiteboards towered over him, filled with equations he didn't fully understand. But in the center, there was a clean space. With a trembling hand, Diego picked up a blue dry erase marker. He wrote 7 words. Just 7 words. Then, beneath them, he drew a simple diagram, the kind a child would draw. Nothing fancy, no complex mathematics. He stared at what he'd written, doubt flooding back. This was stupid. They'd see it and think some janitor's kid was playing a prank. They'd erase it. They'd laugh. Diego put the marker down and ran back to the corner where his backpack sat, his chest tight with fear and something else he couldn't name. Hope, maybe. Or maybe just the desperate wish that someone would finally listen. The next morning, at 6:47 a.m., Dr. Sarah Chen was the first to enter the war room. She carried her usual extra-large coffee, her eyes bloodshot from another sleepless night spent running simulations that led nowhere. She glanced at the whiteboard out of habit. Then she stopped. Her coffee cup slipped from her hand, hitting the floor in an explosion of dark liquid. Oh my God! Within minutes, the entire team surrounded the board, staring at 7 words written in childish handwriting. Why do they all talk at the same time? Below it, a simple drawing, stick-figured drones with arrows pointing between them, all labeled 0.3 seconds. And beneath that, another drawing, the same drones, but with different numbers, 0.3 seconds, 0.6 seconds, 0.9 seconds, random delays. Robert Zhang broke the silence. Who wrote this? Nobody answered, because they were all thinking the same impossible thought. What if this child's question was the answer they've been missing for 27 days? The war room exploded into chaos. "Pull up Simulation Protocol 7, Sarah shouted, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "Implement random delay intervals between 0.2 and 0.8 seconds on the synchronization handshakes." Robert was already coding, his hands shaking with something between excitement and disbelief. If this works, if this actually works. Dr. Okonkwo stood frozen, staring at the childish stick figures on the whiteboard. We spent 6 months building more complex algorithms. We added layers, machine learning, predictive models. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And the answer was to make it simpler? The first simulation launched. 10 virtual drones, random sync delays, 30 seconds. No cascade. 60 seconds. Still flying. 2 minutes. Perfect. Skate it up, Sarah ordered. 47 drones, real-world parameters, now. The room held its collective breath as the advanced simulation loaded. 47 drones, 12 cities, exact conditions from the day of the crash. 1 minute passed. 2. 5. 10 minutes of flawless operation. Someone started crying. Robert, the 24-year-old genius, had his head in his hands, shoulders shaking. It works. Oh, God, it actually works. Sarah's voice cut through the emotion. Who wrote this? I need to know who wrote this right now. Within 20 minutes, security footage provided the answer. 11:47 p.m. Previous night. A small figure entering the empty war room. Dark hair, backpack, a child. They traced him through the building's cameras, watched him follow a woman in a cleaning uniform, saw him sitting in corners, invisible, night after night. Maria Flores, the security chief said, pulling up her employee file. Night shift janitorial. Been here 3 years. The kid must be her son. Sarah grabbed her phone. Get her up here, now! Maria's phone rang at 7:32 a.m., jolting her awake after just 4 hours of sleep. The caller ID showed Titan Tech headquarters. Her blood turned to ice. They found out Diego was in the war room. They saw him touch the whiteboard. She was fired. After 3 years of perfect attendance, of being invisible and grateful, one mistake and... Miss Flores? This is Sarah Chen, head of engineering. We need you and your son to come to the executive floor immediately. I'm so sorry, Maria stammered in accented English. Diego, he didn't mean to cause trouble. Please, I need this job. I can't... Miss Flores? Sarah interrupted, her voice strange. Just, please come. Bring Diego. It's important.
The elevator ride to the 47th floor was the longest of Maria's life. Diego stood beside her, trying to be brave, but she could see his hands trembling. She squeezed his shoulder. Whatever happens, mijo, we face it together. The elevator doors opened to reveal the entire engineering team lined up in the hallway. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward them. Maria's heart stopped. Then they started clapping. Confused, terrified, Maria and Diego walked through the applause like prisoners walking to execution, not understanding what was happening. The conference room doors opened. Marcus Bentley stood at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. Beside him, lawyers, board members, people in expensive suits with serious faces. Miss Flores, Marcus said. Diego. Diego's voice came out as a squeak. I'm sorry, sir. I shouldn't have touched. Did you write on the whiteboard? Marcus interrupted. Diego nodded, tears forming in his eyes. I had a question, and I thought maybe... Did you solve it? Marcus took a step closer. Did you solve the problem that's been destroying my company for 27 days? The room was absolutely silent. Diego's voice was barely a whisper. I don't know. Maybe. I just noticed that when birds fly together, they don't all flap at exactly the same time. If they did, the wind would get all messed up. So I thought maybe the drones could do that too? Not talk to each other at exactly the same second? Just wait a little bit. Different amounts? Marcus stared at this 12-year-old boy in a too-big jacket and worn sneakers, who had just explained in 30 seconds what 200 engineers couldn't solve in 6 months. Then Marcus Bentley did something he hadn't done since the crisis began. He smiled. We tested your solution, he said quietly. It works. Perfectly. Maria's knees nearly buckled. Diego blinked, processing the words.
We spent millions on consultants. We hired the best minds in the world. And you, he gestured at Diego, you watched birds in a park. Marcus turned to face his board, his lawyers, his team. I've been humbled by a 12-year-old, and I've never been more grateful to be wrong about anything in my entire life.
3 days later, Marcus Bentley stood before a packed press conference, cameras flashing like strobes. "I'm here to announce that Titan Tech has solved our crisis," he began. "But more importantly, I'm here to introduce you to the person who solved it." He gestured to the side of the stage. Diego walked out, wearing a new suit that Maria had cried over when Marcus's assistant delivered it. The boy looked terrified. "This is Diego Flores. He's 12 years old, and he just earned $100 million. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras went wild. But Marcus wasn't finished. Diego's mother, Maria, has worked as a member of our janitorial staff for 3 years. She cleaned my office every night while I sat there, convinced that genius could only come from Ivy League degrees and 6-figure salaries." His voice cracked. "I was blind. We were all blind." He turned to face Diego directly. "You asked a simple question. Why do they all talk at the same time? That question saved my company. It saved 3,000 jobs, and it taught me the most valuable lesson of my career. That brilliance doesn't come with credentials. It comes from curiosity." The check was real. $100 million, deposited into a trust fund managed by Maria, with provisions for Diego's education, their family's security, and a charitable foundation they would establish together. But Marcus gave them something more valuable than money. Maria was offered and accepted a position as Director of Operations Insight, a newly created role. Her job? To observe, to question, to point out what others missed. Her starting salary was $200,000 a year. Diego received a full scholarship to any school he wanted, plus a summer internship program where he'd work alongside the same engineers who'd once been stumped by the problem he solved. 6 months later, Titan Tech's Skyfleet system was back in operation, better than ever. The Diego protocol became company policy. Every major project now included feedback sessions where anyone, regardless of position, could ask simple questions without judgment. The janitors, the interns, the security guards, everyone had a voice. Marcus framed Diego's original whiteboard note in the lobby. Visitors would stare at those 7 words in childish handwriting. Why do they all talk at the same time? On a Saturday morning, Diego stood in that same lobby, surrounded by 15 kids from his old neighborhood. He'd started a mentorship program, teaching them coding, engineering basics, and most importantly, that their questions mattered. Maria watched from the side, no longer in a cleaning uniform, but in professional attire, though she never forgot where she came from. Marcus approached her, 2 coffee cups in hand. They'd become unlikely friends. The CEO and the former cleaning lady bonded by the moment that changed everything. "Your son didn't just solve a technical problem. He solved my biggest blind spot. I built an empire by surrounding myself with people who thought like me. Diego showed me I was building an echo chamber." Maria smiled. "He just asked a question. The most expensive question in history, and the most valuable." Diego finished his presentation to the kids and walked over, still uncomfortable with the attention, still the same humble boy who'd been too afraid to speak up. "Mr. Bentley, can I ask you something?" Marcus laughed. "After what happened last time, I'll never stop you from asking questions." "Why did it take a kid to see it?" Marcus considered this.
the question hanging in the air like a challenge. Because experts are trained to find complex solutions. You weren't trained. You just looked. Sometimes the smartest thing we can do is remember how to see like a child, without assumptions, without ego, without the weight of what we think we already know. Diego nodded, processing this. Then he said something that would become the final line in a book Marcus would write about the experience. I think maybe the answer was always simple. You just had to be brave enough to say it out loud. This story isn't just about a boy who made $100 million. It's about what happens when we stop listening, when expertise becomes arrogance, when credentials become barriers, when complexity becomes an excuse for missing the obvious. The cleaning lady's son saw what 200 brilliant engineers couldn't because he didn't know he wasn't supposed to see it. Sometimes, the most valuable person in the room is the one who isn't trying to prove they belong there. So here's my question for you. What simple solution are you overlooking right now because it seems too obvious? If this story inspired you, hit that like button. If you believe the underdog can win, subscribe for more stories that prove it. And drop a comment telling me, what's your simple solution that everyone else is missing? Because maybe, just maybe, you're one question away from changing everything. Don't underestimate yourself. The world needs your simple ideas.